Tennessee signed a top 10 class. And I've long made the argument that every recruiting class is somewhat the same in that half of the guys are going to be contributors, half of the guys are not. And then if you're lucky, you have a couple of stars out of there. I don't want to say lucky, talent evaluation, beating other teams. That is always a factor. But what's funny is when you go back and look at the top 10 classes that Tennessee has signed historically, Caleb, they have not been fantastic. And I think there's a reason for that in one case. So let's look back at those classes because the ones I have, and there was a little bit of a discrepancy in one year, but we're going to go by the 247 composite ranking because that takes them all into account. So we're going to basically 2009, 2010, 2014, 2015. So let's take a look at that 2009 class first. That was a top 10 class, number 8 in the nation. Clearly, Lane Kiffin was taking dudes with some very questionable backgrounds, and it was all about assembling a class as fast as possible. That class absolutely was a disaster, more felons than all SEC players. Perhaps it would have been better had Lane Kiffin stayed as that guiding force. I don't know. I mean, you've got Jansen Jackson, who is serving prison time for murdering his mom's boyfriend and killed his cellmate as well, and was known for threatening media members while he was at Tennessee with physical harm and violence and death. I don't know that they would have saved him. I don't know that, on the other hand, Bryce Brown wouldn't have been a good back at Tennessee. He played well in the NFL for a bit for the Eagles. So that class is hard to really get a gauge on what they would have done if Lane Kiffin stayed. Surely it would have been better. I'm not sure it would have been exemplary, though, Caleb.
Yeah, I agree. I think Lane Kiffin did a lot of things his first year at Tennessee to be able to sell what he was doing for the future. And I think selling a top 10 class, it was more important to sell a top 10 class than it was to actually have an effective top 10 class. Because you're right, he just threw together a hodgepodge of elite players, signed them, touted the top. I remember him touting the top 10 class. And I also remember him
talking trash about Florida.
Over Nukees Richardson, who he had to dismiss from the team halfway through the year.
Who is the only player I have seen straddle a punt twice, which is a very unique way of trying to return a punt. To somehow straddle it and let the ball go through your legs twice. He did it twice, Caleb, during that season. Not once I said, I've never seen anybody straddle it. And like 3 games later, he did it again. Sorry.
Well, yeah. And so, let's not forget, this was part of a lot of things Lane Kiffin did. Another thing he did, Dave, you covered that team. I'm going to give a hot take. I remember 2 games, the Florida and Alabama games of that year. He coached that Florida game to keep it close, not even to try to win. He wanted to sell to recruits that he kept that game close because the game plan in the fourth quarter was Tennessee was down 23-6 and was still huddling. They were still trying to get the right play in. And then in the Alabama game, we all talk about the field goal block. That was a long field goal that Lane Kiffin settled for with 30 seconds left. You don't do that.
That was a huge mistake. And I was on the sideline at the time. He should have tried to get, you said 30 seconds. He milked it down to, I believe, 4 or 2. And he should have tried to pick up about 15, 20 more yards.
I agree. He did that to escape blame. Because if he calls the wrong play and there's a turnover there or something, he gets blamed. But if he sits right there and puts it all on Daniel Lincoln for not making the field goal, he escapes blame and everybody puts it on Daniel Lincoln.
I don't think that was going through his head on the side.
I do. I think that's how Lane Kiffin coached the whole year because we also saw how many times he dismissed recruits to make room for his players. And his new freshmen, many of whom didn't really work out that well. So I just thought there were so many things he did that maybe would have worked out had he stayed. But because he didn't stay and bolted, it left Tennessee in a disastrous situation.
Okay, I'll wander down the thought-provoking lane of the Florida game, no pun intended. But I think he was all in it to win that Alabama game. I thought he made a serious mistake, and that's indicative of a guy who hasn't been a head coach for very long with clock management. But nevertheless, so we move on, and another class that rated in the top 10 was the 2010 class. That resulted in quarterback Tyler Bray, Jawan James, receiver Justin Hunter, defensive lineman Jacques Smith, and a bunch of guys that didn't come to Tennessee that were midterm enrollees because Ed Orgeron was calling them and telling them that they had left and that they should go to Southern California, which most didn't. I think only one did. But ultimately, that class actually could have been even higher. They ended up at 7. They could have been maybe higher if some of those guys would have stuck. But again, a class that we have no idea what would have happened if there's any stability at the head coaching position. And somebody brought up a great point on our message board. These guys didn't have Josh Heupel. That's from Vols time. And you're absolutely right. And there seems to be some steadiness to Tennessee's program they haven't had in a long time. Would this class have been better? Yeah, probably, but it wasn't at the end that bad at all. Caleb, it proved to be pretty strong.
No, it wasn't that bad of a class. Just to look at this, specifically the guys Derek Dooley signed, James Stone was a good signing. That was him. Derrick Rogers was a good signing until he got dismissed from the team. But for 2 years, Derrick Rogers was a reliable receiver. You have, let's see, Dontavis Sapp. He had a bit of an impact. Rajon Neal, starting running back for a pretty long while. Michael Rivera was a heck of a receiving tight end for Tennessee. And from Lane Kiffin's side, people Lane Kiffin brought in Justin Hunter, Matt Sims. These are players who all had an impact. Tyler Bray, the biggest Corey Miller, Michael Plardy. The biggest bust of this class, Zach Fulton, who started in the NFL for years, Jacques Smith. I would say Matt Milton was the biggest bust of this class. 4-star wide receiver. There was a lot of, I remember the hype behind Matt Milton and just never amounted to anything. But yeah, it wasn't a bad class.
Now, here's where the classes, I think, get a little inflated. So the 2 classes we talked about were classes that didn't reach their potential because of a coaching change, which they're not going to reach their potential if there's a coaching change unless there's some really strange circumstance in which a beloved coach comes in. So be sure and hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed yet, do that. Like button helps us bring more people into the channel. Now, the 2 classes I want to talk about now are not under that same scenario. They are under the head coach got them inflated scenario through manipulating recruiting rankings. So number 7 in 2014, you had Butch Jones making sure that Tennessee had a top 10 class by visiting with a recruiting analyst and getting their rankings up. Your thoughts on the class headline, of course, by Derek Barnett, receiver Josh Malone. You also had Jalen Hurd, Todd Kelly, the Berry brothers. That class ended up being pretty darn good. And yeah, is it the number 7 in the class? In retrospect, that's probably a little bit high, but they definitely got a lot out of that class.
They got a lot out of some people in that class. Wasn't even close to the ranking it got. Jalen Hurd was not a 5-star. Anybody who saw Jalen Hurd play knows he was not a 5-star at all.
Well, that's one of the it's definitely one of the examples I would use to say that Butch Jones got his ranking pushed up.
I believe that.
Jalen Hurd was told by Alabama that he needed to play defensive end, and so he didn't consider Alabama any longer. Tennessee gave Jalen Hurd the opportunity to play running back, and they boosted his rating after he committed.
Yeah, and even if he was to play running back, he's a power back. He didn't fit what Butch Jones was trying to do with those zone reads, the smash. I call Butch Jones' offense the smash mouth spread, where offensive linemen still block like they're in a pro style, but Jalen Hurd wasn't a fit for that. Josh Malone worked out. Vic Wharton didn't work out. Todd Kelly had some injury issues. But I mean, look at these busts. These were all 4-stars. DeAndre Payne, Daniel Helm, Joe Henderson, Dylan Bates. Dylan Bates never saw the field. I mean, that had to be a legacy 4-star rating, right?
Well, yeah. See, I think there's a common theme among Jalen Hurd and Dylan Bates. I feel like that there were guys that Butch Jones felt like he had to get to say, hey, I got the number 1 player in the state, Jalen Hurd. Look at that. And Dylan Bates, I think, and the Berry brothers, I felt like he thought all along that he would get them. So there's a common theme among these guys, and that is either he lucked into them because of legacy, or he picked guys because of their rating and ranking that weren't great fits to his system across the board.
Yep. That's how I felt too. And he was trying to sell early on that he was getting these top 5 recruiting classes, and he won. Don't forget this. Butch Jones won over the fan base with this class for a while. people were bought in.
Yeah. Who is the Butcher kid? Smoky Mountain Red brought up the Butcher kid.
I don't know the Butcher kid.
Yeah.
But some of the best players from that class are actually 3-stars because you had Ethan Wolf, Jakob Johnson, who's still in the NFL, and Emmanuel Mosley, who, when he gets healthy next year, will still be the starting cornerback for the San Francisco 49ers. So
let's go to the next season, 2015, number 4, Tennessee's 2015 class. At the top, it was Khalil McKenzie. Everybody was just nuts about him, kind of like the Nico Phil, except he was a defensive tackle. So amplify that times 10 when you're talking about a quarterback. But Khalil McKenzie was supposed to be the guy. He wasn't. Kyle Phillips, Shaw Tuttle were good on the defensive line. You had Alvin Kamara, who was a great pickup. Jawan Jennings in that class had off-field issues, but I don't think anybody would question his talent. But number 4 in the nation, a little high in retrospect.
Very high, yes. Butch did get more out of this class from the 2014 class. I'll give him that. Because we know Kamara. Khalil McKenzie was not a 5-star, but he was a starter for Tennessee consistently. So was Kyle Phillips. So was Drew Richmond. Most of the 4 and 5 stars ended up starting. The question about the Butcher kid, this was this class, Andrew Butcher from Alpharetta. I forgot about Andrew Butcher. Preston Williams, I think, only left because Tennessee was deep enough at wide receiver. He wanted to go elsewhere.
Like a 3-star kid, right?
He was a 4-star on Rivals, but I think it was a 3-star overall. You're right. Darrell Taylor, a good pickup from this class.
Is anybody old enough to remember the butchers that owned the huge bank in Knoxville that basically upended themselves to get the World's Fair to Knoxville? Yeah, he was related to them. I think that helped grease the wheels for him to be.
Makes sense.
I thought he was a 3-star, but
I think you're right. It was just he was listed as a 4-star on certain services.
I recall one recruiting analyst. I was like, "How did they take that kid?" And he said, "Well, everybody's got to have a bag man." Anyway.
Here's a funny one because he was just in the Super Bowl. Tommy Townsend was in this class.
Tommy Townsend and his hair were in that class.
Lost the punting job to Trevor Daniel. So I would say this class, it wasn't a top 5 class, but he got the most out of this class. And I'll give him credit for that class, much more than the 2014 class. I will say that.
I will go on record and go ahead and tell you the class they just signed will be better than all 4 of those classes.
Oh, I would give you that. I would give you that too. Well, there was a borderline top 10 class I just wanted to mention 2020 with Jeremy Pruitt. That class was better than any of Butch's classes. That class is why Tennessee went 10-2 last year.